The 1990s have come and gone, and yet they return until something new can be created. But is it too late? I'm a pessimist, so for me the answer is not likely. Are the 90s the most influential decade? For the millennial, that answer is probably a resounding yes. We've all been impatiently waiting for Stranger Things to end so we can return to the good shit that Gen Xers secretly know is better but are unwilling to admit. But the 80s are unfortunately here to stay. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher are back in the form of an orange cult leader who is obsessed about what people think of him. Sure, he's more entertaining than Sleepy Time Joe, but until then, let's remind ourselves what the 90s gave us to get this stale taste of dusty old white men out of our mouths. 1994 gave us Pulp Fiction and Final Fantasy VI and Earthbound. 1998 gave us Metal Gear Solid, Ocarina of Time, and Mr. McMahon vs. Stone Cold Steve Austin in the hottest wrestling feud of all time. 1997 gave us The Matrix. 1997 ingratiated us with Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Final Fantasy VII. 1991 gave us the technical end of the fall of the Berlin Wall and thus Fukuyama's end of history prognosis, which the great German thinker of negation G.W. Hegel had already diagnosed all the way back in the 19th century with the supposed triumph of liberal democracy. But then again, doesn't every era proclaim itself to be the last? So what era are we in now? Has the world already ended? It's hard to say. I mean, I'm still here addressing you. You still exist if you're watching this. I was only 10 in 1997. I am a millennial, a child of the 90s. But weirdly enough, none of these examples define millennials. The millennial is defined by an event that happened after the panic of Y2K, the televised spectacle known as September 11th. If you're a millennial, then you almost certainly remember where you were when you first witnessed the terror unfold. This terror was different than the spectacle of 1991, the Gulf War. The Gulf War, unlike 9/11, was televised not to display the United States' vulnerability, but rather its dominance. Cable news became an enterprise that could siphon your attention 24 hours a day, similar to the ESPN model for sports junkies. And this was before on-demand content. The U.S. wasn't the underdog in the Gulf War. It was Stephen Curry dropping 50 on a perplexed and overwhelmed enemy. September 11th, by contrast, was an event that showcased the vulnerability of the United States, thereby creating the need for more security in order to circumvent the panic. In Nazi Germany, it was the Jew who was the scapegoat who impeded our freedom. At the dawn of the 21st century, it was the terrorist Muslim. And in a post-Obama world, it is the migrant worker, DEI recipient, or trans person, which are all paradoxically viewed by one side as both too lazy to get a real job and a threat to our very job security as card-carrying Americans. This is why history is so important, because these patterns continue. And we forget them because we no longer privilege history. The end of history was marked with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1991. The Soviet Union was no more, meaning communism was no more, at least not in the Eastern European variety that had come to define post-World War II America. So, America needed a new enemy. 9/11 traumatized millennials so severely that it created a condition of such heightened panic that change became impossible. Security and comfort were found in consumption, a nostalgic consumption that repeats the supposedly innocent kind given to us all the way back in the 1990s. 1997 is a black hole of memory for me. I wouldn't actually sit down and play Final Fantasy VII until the 21st century, but I do recall one cultural touchstone at the time: the revival of Star Wars in the form of George Lucas's infamous special editions. Star Wars inhabits a space, at least prior to Denis Villeneuve's Dune, in which it is not only Gen X's primary cultural touchstone, but also the millennials, with the revival of Star Wars not only in 1997, but with the polarizing prequels that followed. You know, the ones Zoomers think are good, actually. Whether intentionally or not, the dream duo of Spielberg and Lucas created a binary in Western entertainment that kept us suspended in the aftermath of World War II. The evil empire of Darth Vader was obviously a stand-in for Germany, while the liberals were the noble heroes willing to fight the good fight of the underdog. In other words, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess Leia were the representatives of a democratic good that was distinctly American. No matter how difficult life got, you could always return to the fundamental truth of the good triumphing over evil. And unless you're asleep, this is not actually the case. Video games were still chasing Hollywood in 1997, and in many ways, they still are. Final Fantasy VII became the closest a video game ever got to being the Star Wars of the millennial generation. Final Fantasy VII is the PG-13 version of Star Wars. Obviously, Final Fantasy VII was much more than that for us. I mean, the original Star Wars trilogy is a roughly 6-hour experience. Final Fantasy VII in 1997 is roughly 36 hours according to HowLongToBeat.com, which is 4 hours longer than 2020's Final Fantasy VII Remake, which comprises only the Midgar section of the game. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will take anywhere between 40 and 100 hours to complete, depending on how much side content you're willing to subject yourself to. Me personally, not a lot. This is not a review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It is a desperate plea, I guess. And no, I am not relearning this game's esports battle system. I'm too old and I'm out of time. I beat it on easy, because I don't need to prove anything. I've beaten Demon Souls. The opening hours of Final Fantasy VII are hyperlinear in a way any single-player Call of Duty fan could appreciate. And I did hear a lot of jocks at my high school make fun of Final Fantasy's turn-based combat, in which characters have to patiently wait their turn. Strategy hadn't calcified into their brains, but weirdly, there were other jocks who sincerely admired Final Fantasy VII. This made absolutely no sense to me, but the recognition consoled me as an antisocial teenager who was cool with both the weird kids and the jock kids, but preferred staying at home instead of trying to impress any of them. But the moment that truly knocked me loopy when I played Final Fantasy VII as a young teen was Wall Market. My favorite part of every Final Fantasy growing up was hanging out in the towns. In fact, I dreaded having to leave because I knew a potential roadblock of progress was gonna have to be overcome. But Wall Market was unlike any town I had ever experienced. Wall Market features two moments that stuck with me. One made me dizzy with the potential of video games, and the other petrified me as a person, as a subject, as an identity. You're on a date with Aerith, just hanging out on the outskirts of Sector 6, while Tifa coincidentally happens to drive by, captive as a prisoner of slum overlord Don Corneo. With the aid of Aerith's Mary Sue morality and fashion sense, we save Tifa from the Don by dressing as a woman. I wasn't disgusted by it, nor was I confused. In 2005, I let the girl I liked paint my nails. I didn't really care what dudes thought, because the most important thing for me was being able to talk to her. Is it possible I'd feel this way had I not chosen to play Final Fantasy VII? At any rate, this motherfucker has two women clamoring for his attention. Cloud dresses as a woman to save his first girlfriend, but that's just it. He's a straight man faced with the responsibility of saving the world while simultaneously being a player caught in a love triangle. How is Cloud gonna save the world when he's at least equally concerned with getting his dick wet? Either from his canonical pure girlfriend or his hot childhood friend. My Lacadian-trained therapist once humbled me so severely that I considered never returning to therapy after this experience. My biggest life issue at the time was my soul-crushing retail job, but I was also torn between two women at this job, romantically. One of them I had been pursuing for years, but didn't show any interest in me until another woman began pursuing me. My Lacanian-trained therapist, typically quiet in that frustrating minimalist way, he heard me just rambling on and on and on about these two women and how it gave me, such like a purpose in life. And he said one thing, and it was his kind of lameness humbled me, because he asked me a question and like a joke, obvious statement I wasn't ready for. He said, "Gee, Scott, you seem to be quite the player." My cheeks went flush with embarrassment. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't tell that. another personal thing about me for probably at least 6 months. In fact, I'm pretty sure I canceled the next few sessions after that because I was so offended. Wall market terrified me because I had never experienced being sexually assaulted in either real life or in a video game. I can't think of any other mainstream game, let alone any game, to throw the shackles of the symbolic and bombard us with the real. Resident Evil and Silent Hill were horrifying, sure, but nothing could have prepared me for the anxiety of being the object of another man's desire, or multiple men's desires, in Wall Market. Replaying the scene in which Cloud and Eris are trapped in a room with Don Corneo's goons, all saying lecherously creepy things as they sashay their way ever closer to us, made my skin crawl. Again, I was 13 when I first experienced this, and while I don't possess the same savant memory of a Tim Rogers, I know my brain melted in overwhelming anxiety and confusion when I first experienced this, because I know I certainly did in my late 30s. Final Fantasy VII stars a terrorist organization named Avalanche who work as freedom fighter environmentalists staving off two enemies. The initial enemy is Shinra, a monolithic corporation along the likes of Amazon or Walmart or the WWE. They control everything from the Mako to the air. Shinra is overtly evil, driven entirely by exploitation and profit incentives, and they're killing the planet in the process. The other enemy is singular and the game's true evil, Sephiroth, a Nietzschean superhuman created in a lab who was once a loyal member of Soldier, but has since then branched off and gone full chaotic evil once he discovers his mother too was created in a lab. As much as we don't want it to be, it always seems to be about the mother, doesn't it? Pleasure or satisfaction is not the same as enjoyment. In psychoanalysis, pleasure is defined as a return to homeostasis. I'm hangry because I've been working all day and now I have a headache. So I get a sandwich and hopefully eating that will return me to some state of normality so I can continue to function. Enjoyment, or if you want to be pretentious about it, jouissance, is a far deeper and insidious form of pleasure. It's an intense, oftentimes painful enjoyment that unfolds differently depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on. A joke, if you'll allow me. A man is walking down the street and encounters a genie who offers him one wish. The man can have anything he wants, but on one condition, that whatever the man gets, his neighbor gets twofold. So the man thinks for a moment and says, "Take one of my eyes." Enjoyment for the Trump supporter comes from the exclusion of another, a manufactured forever enemy. Ever notice how so much of his rhetoric involves DEI hires, trans people, and migrant workers? All of which are somehow both lazy and always threatening to take our jobs. The right, or independence, gets off on the exclusion of another. It's no surprise that the man stopped talking about building a wall after his first term in 2017. Even if the wall became an unmitigated success in keeping lazy, hard-working migrants out, he'd be left without a scapegoat to blame. The leftist form of enjoyment doesn't exclude others, but that doesn't mean it doesn't take on its own viciously self-destructive form. The leftist enjoyment rests in non-belonging to a system that isn't designed for them. But some of us, me, live in a perpetual state of delusion that we are the main characters of our own self-induced revolution. If only the others could see this simple fact, we'd all be liberated. But do we really want to be liberated? What happens then? When the revolution is won in V for Vendetta, the movie ends. We don't know what the revolution looks like because we want the fantasy to continue. Our days might be long and arduous at our jobs that we hate, but then we could just come home, take an edible, pop an Addy, or crack a few high lifes and return to our feel-good delusion of saving the world in our doom-scrolling isolation. We can only dream how to win the revolution, but doesn't that fantasy require its own enemies to overcome and conquer? This might be a hot take, I don't know, but something that has always bothered me about the left is the complete lack of recognition towards the military. It's the same type of people who hate on John Cena. If you ask me, people who hate on the military and John Cena are narcs, which you're probably not used to hearing. Aren't they supposed to be the narcs? But if you're going to overthrow a government, you're going to have the military on your side. I honestly don't know how to wrestle with this contradiction because I have friends and family who are cops, and yet I find myself trapped in this identity of a leftist who is supposed to use the master signifier, all cops are bastards. But people who say that or make that part of their identity or put that in their social media profiles to identify as tend to be pretty insufferable. and not people I want to hang out with. I've been pretty vocal on this channel about denouncing what I perceive to be Call of Duty's banality in glorifying American hegemony through gratuitous scenes of torture and violence. Jacob Geller released an entire video chronicling every torture scene in the series over a 4th of July weekend. What do we do with this? If you're me, you maniacally laugh into the abyss until it stops laughing back. Here's the thing, both cops and leftists are perverts. The former is a sadist who will not only hit you with the stick, but show you the stick in order to see you cringe. You've been a very bad boy. Admit it. Confess. And the leftist wants to make the cop feel guilty for laying down the law, a masochist to the cop's sadism. And this gets us absolutely nowhere but the return of the same again, and again. So back to Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII was the first game I decided to sit down and play when I moved out on my own, renting out an apartment with my own hard-earned money. I don't mean in college when I was having mommy, daddy, and grandparents paying for my tuition. So if you're watching this and think I'm some kind of working-class intellectual, I'm not. My life hasn't been easy, but it hasn't been all that hard either. A decade after living in that apartment, I decided to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and make this video. It was originally going to be called, Will Final Fantasy VII Save the World or End It? This title was inspired by Tim Rogers' review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, in which he mentions a co-worker at Sony Computer Entertainment making the statement, they're going to remake Final Fantasy VII, and it's either going to save the world or end it. But why Final Fantasy VII? Why not, I don't know, Metal Gear Solid or The Witcher 3 or another JRPG? I mean, every single Japanese role-playing game is about a group of outcasts partying up and saving the world, right? Final Fantasy was the brand of JRPG that was put in that privileged position for that Sony employee to even ask that question. The only reason Final Fantasy VII is the PG-13 Star Wars of the millennial generation is because of the monopolization of the Final Fantasy brand. How many people decided to buy a PlayStation 3 solely for Final Fantasy XIII in 2010, when Microsoft of all companies was making the best JRPGs at the time? It is a brand that knows their audience and yet continues to have the audacity to make games centered around oppressed Magic users who all share the same skin color. This isn't a brand that is particularly interested in the full breadth of human experience. It is a brand concerned with making money by appealing to the widest common denominator. Aerith is an ancient and the chosen one, but she's also white. But would Kenny Omega and Tim Rogers, also white, have been a condition for possibility without Final Fantasy VII, or the Final Fantasy brand in particular's monumental influence? This is a guy who has based his entire pro wrestling career off of becoming a star by somehow never being legitimized by the monolith of professional wrestling, the WWE. Kenny Omega, like Tim Rogers, said, heck this. That's their language, not mine, because they don't like to swear. I'm cool with that. They said, I'm leaving the banality of my own country, and I'm going to go to the other end of the world in order to find myself. Kenny Omega and Tim Rogers will never openly call themselves leftists, but they are, to me, the epitome of leftist non-belonging. These guys noped out of Western culture and ingratiated themselves into Japanese culture so absolutely that they even learned how to speak the language. They are in some sense more Japanese than they are Canadian or American. But let's put a pin in that for now, because like any good potential member of the professional managerial class, I must now share with you a personal story.
Wait, didn't you just share a personal story?
Well,
You sound obsessed with yourself.
I
What,
want-
a narcissist?
I wanted to talk about how I walked all the way to my apartment building because I was suffering a delusion of holding the keys to saving the world. All I had to do was return to the apartment where I replayed Final Fantasy VII to get that answer.
But you already mentioned that.
Traversing the fantasy means breaking through the symbolic world of appearances and noticing that reality is structured through the law of fantasy. Remember what I said earlier about CNN and 24/7 access to news coverage? How many boomers will scoff when you tell them you get your news from Twitter when they get their objectively true news from the TV? I can't be the only one who's ever experienced this. That's fantasy, baby. And if you call them out on it, be prepared for a stiff encounter of the real, because you're going to have to deal with their breakdown next. Either that, or they'll just pretend like they didn't hear you. But when I was first learning this stuff, I thought traversing the fantasy meant using yourself as a main character in the story of your life in order to self-actualize what you actually want. But of course, this contradicts enjoyment, especially if you like to self-destruct. I believe if I do my part in saving the world or becoming a paid content creator, I will receive some sort of pleasure or return to homeostasis, the Landian desire to accelerate to zero, or by touching God, becoming whole again. But this will leave me miserable because it's not about getting the thing or becoming whole. What happens a couple minutes after you get the thing? That reassuring feeling of wholeness evaporates, and well, it's time to find something else to make you whole. Thank God for advertising though, right? Hey y'all, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you like my content and would like me to continue making it at a frequent rate, please give me money on the crowdfunding site Patreon. Please, I'm begging you, because I'd much rather be doing this than returning to wage labor. However, I know this probably won't be the case, but hey, at least it's a start. In addition to getting videos early, you will also receive bonus lectures in which I break down what I'm talking about in further detail. For example, in this video, I will be talking about the infamous work of the polarizing psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan and his theories on the symbolic, castration, and the death drive, just to name a few. Now, back to the show. So where are the jocks at? Any heteronormative homies out there watching this? Well, I've got bad news for you, because I'm about to rain on your parade too. Let's talk about every normie's favorite American pastime. Specifically, the Detroit Football Lions. If Lions fans actually get to see the impossible, namely winning a Super Bowl, you can rest assured we'll all be crashing on that high, like we're coming down off of 20 milligrams of Adderall just a few short hours afterward. We'll wake up the next day and life will continue as it always has. The Lions are now the best, but do you feel like you're the best? You're still working a job you hate, or maybe you're one of the lucky few who have the privilege to call off of work the day after the Super Bowl. So much of the enjoyment is in the thrill of being a loser for all those years. What were all those years of loserdom for, if not to lead to this moment in time of finally winning the big one? And that eventuality keeps getting delayed, creating an ever greater demand. It's as if every humiliation, every defeat, every setback of being a Lions fan is retroactively redeemed in this one moment of triumph, and it'll feel so good in the moment, but the moment will eventually pass because capitalist linear time only moves forward. And it is no coincidence that football is a conservative means of enjoyment, because there always has to be competition with an enemy. American football is kind of giving the Roman Empire, guys. Fox Football Sunday signals the tired, overworked everyman automaton with the triumphant orchestral swells of an anthem that goes harder than even the Star-Spangled Banner. The soothing sounds of the imperial march of colonization in which we, the working class normie, spend the Lord's Day in front of our OLEDs and fantasy football screens at a hedonistic bliss of consumption from 10 in the morning to 11:30 at night. And the Catholic God only demands 1 hour each Sunday? But how am I going to throw shade on football when my preferred sport is not only fake, but arguably even more problematic? Yeah, baby, I'm talking about pro wrestling, a sport which, at least under Vince McMahon's watchful eye, experienced not one, but 2 sex trafficking scandals. One involving little boys in the early 90s that took a page out of the Catholic Church, and a current one in which a bunch of women endured absolutely horrendous things at the hands of a fascist sex pest who once literally walked into a Catholic church and proclaimed on live television that Vince McMahon was God himself.
Blessed be the name of Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
But WWE ain't my brand. It's AEW, which unfortunately is about as relevant as a boomer critiquing a Kendrick Lamar performance.
Bro, I couldn't understand a word that was being said, man. I had my volume turned up.
Forget Make America Great Again. Can we make AEW great again? Please return, Daddy. We're all bored and lost without you. I have 2 favorite Kenny Omega promos. The first one happened after he became the first Westerner to ever win the G1 Climax, a grueling round-robin style tournament. After his improbable win, he addressed the Japanese crowd for the first time in Japanese.
今回だけ俺が日本語を話す。
This white dude from Winnipeg had them in the palm of his hand like a stand-up comedian.
びっくりしてるんだろう。
You want to talk about a sport that is all about enjoyment over the good? Professional wrestling fits that bill perhaps more than any other sport. Pro wrestling is quite literally about wrestling with contradictions between egos. If only we had more time of that in the spectacle of American politics. Frank Herbert's Dune series was mostly written before Star Wars, and yet it took over a half century for Dune to finally outmuscle Star Wars in the culture war for relevancy. Probably doesn't hurt that this guy is at least 10 times harder than Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford combined. Dune problematizes the good-evil distinction by giving us a slightly more lesser evil, more evil binary. Remember how many liberals who rejected Bernie Sanders said that voting for Hillary over Trump was the lesser evil option? Well, that's Dune in a nutshell. Paul Atreides is the hero of his story, much like Luke Skywalker or Cloud Strife or Sephiroth, but unlike them, he is well aware of how problematic his situation is. Initially, he's the reluctant hero who reassures the Fremen that he is not a leader, but one of them. That soon becomes a lie when, at the end of Part 2, Paul asserts his authority over the Fremen, and the Fremen acquiesce, because they fear his rage and certainty. Paul's destiny was always to become the emperor, but his path to the throne was shrouded in the same kind of rhetoric we've seen from so many supposed reluctant heroes. He's initially a humble servant to the public, until he manifests the reality that he is the actual chosen one. Cloud has a breakdown when he realizes his memories aren't actually his, but another random soldier's who's actually more productive than him. I mean, who wouldn't? This guy's a fraud. Before his realization, he was king shit. He was not only on a noble quest to save the world, he was caught up in a delightful love triangle with his hot childhood friend and his cute, innocent girlfriend, who also happens to be the source of good in the world. And the too good to be true scenario turns out to be just that for the poor bastard. This is where leftist enjoyment can become a bad thing if left unchecked. Schizophrenic bodies without organs posing as cracked eggs splitting into infinite directions with no stability, banging their heads against the wall of contradiction, but making no headway. You become the type of person at your family get-togethers who makes critiquing the system your entire personality. Soon friends no longer want anything to do with you, so you're left feeling even more alienated at the wall. You are the hero of your own story, but you're also psychotic. This isn't good, and it should never be glorified. The world might well be beyond saving at this point, and by that I mean humans, because as the George Carlin bit goes,
Besides, there's nothing wrong with the planet. The planet is fine. The people are.
So does this mean we should all give up and take the black pill? Or do we act as if the end has already happened and will continue to happen each day again and again? Maybe choosing not to shop at Amazon or Starbucks one day a year will save us. Final Fantasy VII clearly pales in comparison to Star Wars as a cultural phenomenon, and maybe I'm missing the mark here. Are culture wars politics? I mean, we can get rad libs, reactionaries, and socialists all into a stadium to watch a football game, so I don't see how this is any different. The intersection of people who are interested in Final Fantasy VII is surprising. We value the underdog. We side with the underdog, but are we the underdog? We certainly think we are, but valuing the underdog is a bougie belief. We hijack our campuses to protest the bullshit happening in Palestine, which I'm all for, but without realizing that Hamas is a fundamentalist group with a ton of money and influence who are just as responsible for seeing Palestinians as expendable as the paranoid Zionists. Midgar and Junon lay bare with visual confidence the brutal reminder of neoliberalism. It's not left versus right, it's up versus down. I am so tired of suffering in the same ways. I was born right before the end of communism, and I don't know, it's like, why aren't Americans waking up to how all this keeps repeating itself? It's no coincidence that late capitalism gives birth to both zombies and robots. My second favorite Kenny Omega promo happened seemingly after his peak, in the middle of a year-long bout with diverticulitis. And to anyone who doesn't believe Kenny Omega is as tough as Brock Lesnar, please spare us your posturing because we don't see it and we don't care. Omega opens himself this time not to Japan, but to the audience he's always been less comfortable with. In his hometown of Winnipeg, against his will and on orders from Tony Khan, Omega ventures out in a suit and aviator shades to show himself at his most vulnerable.
If there's a 10% chance, a 5% chance, a 1% chance, I made a mission statement to change the world.
I can watch this promo 100 times and never grow tired of it. I can cry tears of ecstasy because I feel like my unbelonging is being seen and represented. This is what any noble hero does. Heroes are designed to keep us loyal to the brand, and we fall for it every single time. The rebels in Final Fantasy VII, Star Wars, and Dune are hot, not just physically, but because of their supposed revolutionary spirit. But did any of these produce a revolutionary spirit in us? Star Wars and Disney are a match made in neoliberal heaven. Work a desk job you hate, but hey, at least you can spend the time at your job fantasizing about going to Comic-Con dressed as your favorite character. So I wonder aloud to you, dear viewer, what does the left mean to you? And in which way do you feel as if you don't belong to this system of terror and security and control? Let me know in the comments because I'm genuinely fascinated by this. And if you're someone who's looking to post a reactionary comment, here's my pre-planned response.
Nobody gives a fuck.
If you hear nothing else in this video, hear this. The American conservative or independent enjoys the exclusion of others in order to belong, and the left enjoys non-belonging. We are each the atomized main characters of our story in which we see ourselves as the reluctant hero, eventually achieving self-actualization. I literally walked from my house to my old apartment building where I first lived alone and played Final Fantasy VII, with the delusion that returning to this place would unlock the answer to saving the world. I actually believe that. This is ridiculous at best and a psychotic delusion at worst. The best it can do is give me content for yet another video on YouTube telling you what you already know, that we're f***ed and beyond saving. And yet we still live and breathe, mostly due to nostalgia. Were the 90s so much better? Like the Lions winning the Super Bowl, what will happen when the revolution is televised? Every meta-narrative of world history has been wiped out except for the one that has triumphantly proclaimed the limitless potential of labor and capital. To even consider a life alternative to the endless pursuit of profit accumulation is to be disregarded and discarded to the wall of shame and deportation. Sure, it's fun to play out the revolution, but it's another thing to practice the revolution by organizing. But how are we going to organize when all we could think about is how much of an inconvenience that's going to be? Especially when there's a Lions Super Bowl to be won, an entertaining spectacle to look forward to, and a new video game or movie or album or pair of shoes that the moment we unbox and smell, our enjoyment for the thing immediately begins to plummet, because getting the object doesn't get us anywhere closer to God. It only gets us closer to our pain and being woefully incomplete. Thanks for watching.